Everybody wants to increase arrow penetration. It's, in my opinion, the #1 killing factor with your arrows, other than accuracy, of course. So I'm going to explain to you guys 4 things to keep in mind and 4 things you can do that'll increase your arrows penetration when you set up your equipment this season. So #1 is you can shoot smaller diameter arrows. So in general, there's 3 different diameters of arrows that we talk about. We have micros, which are sometimes called a 4mm. There's the small diameter, which would be a 5mm, and then a standard is what they consider a 6mm. Without question, the smaller the diameter, the better penetration you're getting. And here's why. You're putting the same broadhead. If I have a standard diameter and a micro diameter arrow, I'm putting the same broadhead on either one. I'm poking the exact same size hole through the animal. But then what follows is this micro diameter versus the standard diameter. There's less surface area on the micro diameter arrow than the standard. There's less friction. Think about it this way. You have a piece of paper and you poke your broadhead through and make a nice cut in the paper. Now you're going to take like a Sharpie or a marker and pass it through. There's a lot of friction. Versus if you take something thin like a chopstick and pass it through that same hole, there's far less friction. Friction is what slows your arrow down. Smaller diameter arrows also have some other benefits. Because there's less surface area, they fly better through wind. There's less surface area to get pushed around by crosswinds. So that's a big factor. And generally smaller diameter arrows are also stronger because they're packing the same amount of weight, or roughly the same amount of weight, depending on which arrow brand and which model you're using. But they're packing roughly the same amount of weight per inch of arrow, which is called grains per inch, or GPI. Packing the same amount of weight into a smaller tube. So the carbon is more dense and therefore it's stronger. The second thing you can do to increase your arrow's penetration is something I talk about all the time, and that is paper tuning. How does paper tuning increase your penetration? Basically, paper tuning is the process of making sure that when your arrow leaves your bow, the front and the back are perfectly in line with each other. If your bow is not paper tuned, what's going to be happening most likely is that when you're shooting, your arrow will not be coming off perfectly square off your bow. This is a large over exaggeration, but basically your tail is not properly following the front of your arrow. So your arrow will be flying through the air like this, or like this, or tail high. What happens when your arrow is flying like that is it wants to stabilize. So it's going to try and fight to stabilize in the air. And that's when you often see fishtailing. If you've ever seen an arrow do this through the air, that's what's usually happening. Not always, but that's what's usually happening. So when that's happening, your arrow is losing energy because it's trying to stabilize. It's increasing drag because it's not flying in a perfect line through the wind. And if it hasn't stabilized itself by the time it hits the animal, it's going to make contact, and then the momentum is going to be completely off. You can picture it if you have your animal here and your arrow flies and hits it perfectly square, it's going to have no problem zipping right through. But if your arrow is off and hits that animal, the momentum is completely off and you're going to lose a huge amount of penetration. So I'm a huge proponent of paper tuning or bare shaft tuning. Do one or the other. I prefer paper tuning. We have another video on that, but do one or the other. It'll save your penetration and make you more lethal. The third thing you can do to increase your arrow's penetration is shoot a smaller broadhead. Now, I've talked with the Ed Ashby Foundation about this, and a lot of great bow hunters and super slammers I know, and there is a general consensus for the most part that cutting diameter does not make a huge difference in lethality. That might contradict what you normally have in your head, and I get it because gore sells. You see these great big 2-inch cut diameter broadheads slicing open an animal. It seems incredibly lethal, but it is no more lethal than a 1-inch head that's properly placed. We sat down with a surgeon who has over 30 years of hunting and surgery experience to break down shot placement and exactly this topic, the lethality of different broadheads and what is the biggest factor when it comes to the lethality of your arrow on an animal. You can check that video out right here. It's super interesting. But basically, if you have a smaller broadhead, again, less surface area, less friction. It's going to pass through an animal easier, and smaller broadheads are generally going to be more accurate. So at Tooth of the Arrow, we have 1-inch and we have 1 3/16 inch broadheads. Personally, I shoot the 1-inch because I'm all about maximum penetration, and I think that the penetration gain you get from the smaller head is worth more than the extra 3/16 inch cutting diameter of the bigger head. But for years I shot the bigger head, and that head is really good if you have a long draw length or a high poundage bow and you just have no issues with penetration whatsoever. Well, then shoot the bigger head and you can get the best of both worlds. High penetration and a big cut diameter. But in general, don't overthink cut diameter. A properly placed arrow that penetrates is the first and foremost priority when it comes to killing animals. Cut diameter helps, not if it's at the expense of that arrow not going as deep into the animal as it could. And the last thing I'm going to tell you guys that can increase your arrow's penetration is try to trade some of your speed for weight. Now, this is not for everybody. This is all going to come down to what I talk about a lot on this channel and call the golden rule of arrow building. So the golden rule of arrow building is basically that you want to shoot the heaviest arrow you can while maintaining a speed of about 270 to 280 feet per second. That's just where arrows fly optimally. And we know that every projectile, whether it's bullets, a baseball, a football, or an arrow, or even a dart, have an optimal speed at which they fly. You don't see a dart player throwing the dart as hard as they can at the dartboard because they're not going to fly as good as if they do a proper lob, right? It's the same with arrows. If you try to push them too fast, they just don't fly optimally. They lose some of their flight character. So that 270 to 280 feet per second range is ideal. Weight means more for penetration than speed does. And this is general because this is a gradient. If you're shooting a really slow bow, you might struggle with penetration no matter what. But if you're shooting 300 feet per second right now, and this is specifically with compound bows, I want to caveat this. This is just for compound archery that I'm talking about. If you're shooting a 300 or 310 foot per second bow, adding some weight and slowing down your bow will increase your arrow's penetration. And I challenge you to try it. Go out to a target block, try to get a fresh target block so that there's not much wear in it. Take your current fast arrow, let's say it's a 100 grain broadhead and you're shooting 300 feet per second or whatever, and then take the exact same arrow and put 175 grain head or 150 grain head on it and see what penetrates better. And in most setups, and I say most setups because there's a lot of variables that this will come down to, but in most setups, that added weight is going to increase your penetration. There's a whole lot more things you can do to increase your penetration, but that's enough for one video today. If you like this video, let me know. I'll do another one in the future. And if you've made it this far in the video, I want to give you guys 10% off everything on our website using the code YouTube10, 10% off your entire order. Thanks for watching.